Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to TESOL 2250. This is week 12, day 1. And this is a very short video because we're just kind of finishing up a couple of things with questions that we didn't quite finish last week. Also, there's a lot of stuff in the varieties part of structure and varieties. So this week is going to have a lot more varieties-based discussion and videos and whatnot. So make sure you take a look at those. There's a documentary that you're going to watch for the next discussion board. That's about an hour long, and some questions you're going to do on that. So for that reason, the structures part is going to be a little bit shorter this week. So I just want to go over a little bit more with yes/no questions, and then we're going to talk about WH questions. So if you recall from class on Friday, we ended with these sentences. Have you eaten lunch? Are you going to eat that? Are divorces becoming common? And are you hungry? So we went over how to diagram a yes/no question. And the main idea is that you diagram the question as if the auxiliary verb or main verb be is back in its core sentence structure. So we saw with have you eaten lunch, we moved auxiliary have back over the subject next to its verb, and we get you have eaten lunch instead. We diagram that as it is, as a statement, and then we finally move the auxiliary verb, showing a movement arrow at the very end, and that's our last step. So you're going to continue working on these 3 sentences below and see how you do with movement in the yes/no questions. Now, as we get to WH questions next, what we're going to find is that these have 2 points of movement. Not just not just the auxiliary verb moves, but also the WH word or phrase. So let's talk a little bit about what WH questions are. So WH questions are questions that ask a question about a content phrase. So content phrases can include things like noun phrases, an adverb phrase or a prepositional phrase that's functioning as an adverb, or they may ask a question about just a determiner or a gen n alone, for example. So let's look at a few examples of this. So let's look at NPs, for example. Let's say I have the sentence, the kids ate the cookies for breakfast. Now, in this instance, I want to ask a question about the subject. So instead of saying the kids, I'm going to say who ate the cookies for breakfast. So I'm going to use a WH word, in this case, who. There aren't very many WH words. We have who, what, when, which, whose. And then we have a number of adverbial words and phrases like why, or how long, or how many times, etc. How frequently. So these are all interrogative prodeterminers or pronouns or proadverbs, as we see these WH words. Now, I can also ask a question about the object noun phrase in a sentence. If I use the same sentence, the kids ate the cookies for breakfast, and I want to know what they ate, I'm going to use exactly that interrogative pronoun, what. So instead of the cookies, I'm going to cross that out and I'm going to put what there. Now, eventually, this what is going to have to move to the beginning of the sentence, because if you remember, the question is, what did the kids eat for breakfast? So that's our second point of movement. We move an auxiliary just like a yes/no question. If we don't have an auxiliary, we have to create one, do. But then another thing that we do is we may sometimes move the WH word as well, so that it's at the very beginning of the sentence. Okay, so we're looking at adverbs, adverb phrases, prepositional phrases that function as adverbs, any kind of adverb type thing. These ones can often be answered with the questions where, when, and how. Those are the most frequent ones. So if I have the sentence, he took my sister to the canyon, I want to ask a question, I'm going to say where in place of to the canyon. Where did he take my sister? So we understand that where, the location, is going to replace that prepositional phrase that's functioning as an adverb to the canyon. If I have the wedding is at 3 and I want to ask a question about when, that's the word I'm going to use. When is the wedding? He went to school on a skateboard. How did he go to school? So that's a question of the means. Now, I can also just ask a question about a determiner alone. So, for example, if I say Mila took that bus to work last week, well, what you're going to notice is instead of replacing the entire, we have the word which is going to replace the word that in this case, which is a determiner, specifically a demonstrative determiner. And in this one, it's a little bit unusual because we also have to include the word bus. If we want to make this a question, it's going to be, which bus did Mila take to work last week? And I can point and say, that bus over there. So which is actually just replacing the word that, the demonstrative, but we also got to take bus along with it when we move which to the front of the sentence. So we will see this when it's a determiner alone, or when you have a gen N. We will see that the whole phrase matters, and we're going to have to move the whole phrase for the WH question. However, we are only replacing one word in that phrase with a WH word. So the same thing happens with gen Ns. Here I have a gen N, which is Natasha's, apostrophe S. And I say, we took Natasha's car to work this morning. Well, if I don't know who, I'm going to replace Natasha's with whose. And the question will be, whose car did we take to work this morning? So notice whose just replaces the gen N, but we still need to have the rest of the phrase that includes car. And that's all going to move together. The WH word and car are going to all move together to the front of the sentence. So these words, what, who, whom, where, when, how, why, etc., they can be divided into specific terminology. So we have the interrogative pronouns. Again, these are those WH words that take the place of a noun or a noun phrase in the original core sentence. So this is what, who, or in some cases, whom. Whom is kind of falling out of style. It's usually used with noun phrase that is a direct or indirect object. You know, for example, to whom did you send the letter? That's an indirect object. However, it is going out of style. Most people don't use whom anymore. They just say who. That's why whom is in parentheses. So these are interrogative pronouns. They're asking a question about a noun or a noun phrase, and they're taking the place of a noun or a noun phrase. Now, we also have interrogative proadverbs. These are WH words that are used in questions to ask about an adverb in the original core sentence, or, PP, prepositional phrase that functions as an adverb. So like where, when, why, how long, how often. These are all interrogative proadverbs. Finally, we have interrogative prodeterminers. Now, these are WH words that we use in questions to ask about either a gen N alone or a determiner alone. So we have whose, which asks about a gen N. We have which, and we have what. These can ask about some kind of determiner. So it's important to note that anytime we have pro something, pro just means stands in the place of. So a pronoun is a word that stands in the place of a noun. A proadverb is something that stands in the place of an adverb. And a prodeterminer is a word that stands in the place of a determiner. So when we do these on our trees, we're not going to differentiate between pronouns, proadverbs, and prodeterminers. We're just going to write int pro, interrogative pro something, okay? And that will be enough for those WH words. I'll show you how that's done in class on Friday. Also, you can take a look at some pages that I post under week 12 for how to diagram those and write them. So when we're diagramming a WH question, we've got 5 steps. Now, when we're diagramming a yes-no question, those are relatively simple. We only have 3 steps there. So the WH question has a couple extra steps. So the first step, just like we did with the yes/no questions, if you see an auxiliary verb at the front of the sentence, which you will, you need to put that auxiliary verb back next to its main verb in the core sentence. The other thing you need to do is look for the WH word or phrase, and you also have to move that back into its original position in the core sentence. I'm going to show you, well, what that position is when we get to class on Friday. So don't worry if you're not sure exactly where to move it to. We'll discuss that on Friday. So this is true. You're only going to move a WH word back into its original position if the WH word or phrase was a direct object noun phrase or an adverb. If you have a subject interrogative pronoun like what or who, you do not move that. It stays in place in situ. So we'll talk about why that is a little bit more later. So far, we move the auxiliary back, and sometimes we move the WH word back. Then we diagram the sentence. Sometimes I use placeholder words, words that the WH word could substitute for. And then once I've diagrammed the whole sentence, then I'm going to move the auxiliary verb back out to the front of the sentence. Finally, I'm going to move the WH word to the very front of the sentence. And the WH word is always going to be the very first thing we read or hear when we hear a WH question. So that's why we move the WH word or phrase out last across the subject and past the auxiliary verb. So a few more steps. We'll see those steps in action when we diagram on Friday. But for now, you can take a look at some practice. Oh, and I forgot. Yep, I forgot to label this. Okay, so the practice questions I want you to try are: what did the kids eat for breakfast? And who ate the cookies for breakfast? Now, I forgot to underline what you should be asking a question about, but hopefully you can figure it out by looking at your WH word. Think about where you can move that WH word back to. And if you get stuck, look at the slide that I showed a few slides ago. You're going to see the example of the statement where these questions came from. And try diagramming that. Okay, so the first one is asking a question about the object noun phrase. The kids ate something for breakfast. The kids ate what for breakfast? And this is always kind of a good test to see where you have to move that WH word back to, because you can do a clarification question or an emphasis question. So for example, if I say to you, the kids ate cookies for breakfast, and I say, the kids ate what for breakfast? Usually if I say that to you, it means A, either I didn't hear you, or B, I can't believe that the kids ate cookies for breakfast. Now notice the construction of those words. The kids ate what for breakfast? Now we can use that as an emphatic or clarification construction because we're going to put what as the direct object. So that's how we know that that WH word what begins as a direct object and then gets moved into our normal position, our normal question position. So we can practice the second question here. This is a subject NP. So I'll tell you this, the WH doesn't move. WH word does not move, I should say. Who ate cookies for breakfast? I want you to try to diagram these to the best of your ability. Make sure you look at the pages that I post under week 12. So it's important to note, as I have down here, a WH word or phrase must always begin the WH question. If the constituent that the WH word replaces does not originate at the beginning of the sentence, it must be moved there. Okay, and that's something we need to keep in our minds when we start to practice these sentences. So here's a little bit more practice with interrogative pro-adverbs. So it's some of the same sentences we saw earlier. Actually, all of the same sentences we saw earlier. Where did he take my sister? When is the wedding? And how did he go to school? So see if you can diagram these as well. Now, our practice sentences for determiners and Gen N are, oh shoot, I didn't write these out. Whose car did you take to work this morning? I think is the only one that we're going to do. So that's this one I think we're going to look at together in class anyway, because it's a little bit more complicated with the Gen Ns and the determiners. So nevertheless, I'm posting some pages under week 12. They're under week 11 at the moment, but we didn't get to them last week. So I'm going to move them to week 12. Take a look at page 108 for determiners in Gen N. And that's going to help you to figure out how to diagram these. Okay. Okay. Here's a couple of examples. This was the sentence I meant to put here. So if we're practicing interrogative prodeterminers, here's the practice sentences. Which bus did Mila take to work last week? And whose car did we take to work this morning? So try working on these. Let's see how we do. And it's a short video, but that's all I've got for today's grammar lesson. So thanks very much for listening, everybody, and I'll see you in class on Friday.